Before time existed, before light, before land, before life itself, there was only an endless, yawning darkness, a void so vast and silent it defied comprehension. This was chaos, the swirling abyss where nothing had shape and everything was possible. Can you picture it? A universe waiting to be born, pulsing with unseen potential. And from this boundless nothingness, something extraordinary stirred the first beings, the very architects of existence. These were the primordial gods, the ancient forces who shaped reality itself according to Greek mythology. But how did the cosmos spring from emptiness? What unimaginable power could transform chaos into order? The Greeks believed it began with these primordial deities, beings so vast and elemental they weren't just gods. They were the fabric of creation. Gaia, the earth, rising solid and unshakable from the void. Tartarus, the unfathomable depths beneath the world. Eros, the irresistible force of love and attraction that bound everything together. These weren't just characters in a story, they were the answers to humanity's oldest questions. How did the sky come to stretch above us? Why does the sea rage and retreat? The myths whisper that it all traces back to these primordial forces clashing, merging, and birthing the universe as we know it. This is where mythology becomes more than tales. It's a breathtaking attempt to explain the unexplainable. And today, we're diving into that shadowy dawn of time, uncovering the secrets of the primordial gods. We'll witness how chaos gave way to order, how love and strife shaped the cosmos, and how these ancient beings set the stage for every myth that followed. By the end, you won't just know their names, you'll feel the weight of their legacy, the echo of their power in every sunrise, every storm, every heartbeat. So let's step into the abyss together and discover how the Greeks believed our world began. The story starts where all great stories do, in the dark before the first light. From that infinite nothingness, chaos emerged not as a god with a face or form, but as the raw essence of emptiness itself. Think of it less as a being and more as the very condition of existence before existence had rules. The ancient Greeks didn't describe chaos with human traits or even a clear gender. It was simply the abyss, the gaping chasm where time, space, and matter had yet to take shape. In Hesiod's Theogony, the oldest surviving account of these primordial forces, chaos appears first, alone in the void before anything else stirs. It's the blank canvas upon which the universe would be painted, a silent, swirling potential waiting to erupt. But not all traditions saw chaos the same way. The Orphic myths, whispered in secretive rituals centuries later, reimagined it as a cosmic egg, a shell of darkness that cracked open to release the first gods. Where Hesiod's chaos was a hollow absence, the Orphic version pulsed with hidden life, suggesting that even the void held a kind of order, a destiny waiting to unfold. This split in interpretation reveals something fascinating. Chaos wasn't just a static backdrop for the Greeks. It was a mystery they kept returning to, a question mark at the heart of creation. Was it a force of disorder or the womb of all things, a destructive nothingness or the first stirring of possibility? Later poets and playwrights couldn't resist giving chaos more familiar traits, calling it a deity with whispers of personality, even painting it as a stormy, brooding figure. But at its core, chaos remained untamable. It was the reason the world could exist at all, because without that initial void, there'd be no space for Earth to rise, no air to breathe, no stars to ignite. Every myth that follows, from the battles of the Titans to the whims of Olympus, traces back to this moment, the breath before the first breath, the dark before the dawn. And that's what makes chaos so hauntingly powerful. It's the reminder that everything, even the gods themselves, began in the unknown. Gaia was the first solid thing in a universe of nothingness, the earth itself given form and voice. Out of chaos swirling void, she rose, vast and unshakable, her body the foundation of all life to come. Unlike the abstract emptiness that birthed her, Gaia was tangible, immediate. You could feel her in the soil beneath your feet, in the roots of ancient trees, in the bones of the mountains. She wasn't just a goddess, she was the land, the very ground of existence. And from her alone, the cosmos began to take shape. But Gaia wasn't content to exist in solitude. From her own essence, she birthed Uranus, the starry sky, a being as boundless as she was steady. Together, they were the first divine pair, earth and heaven locked in an eternal embrace. Their union wasn't just symbolic, it was explosive, generative. From their passion sprang the Titans, those colossal beings who would shape the next age of the world. Yet this wasn't a simple tale of creation. Gaia and Uranus' story twists into something darker, a cycle of betrayal and retribution that echoes through every myth that follows. Uranus, terrified of the power his children might wield, imprisoned them within Gaia's own body, the depths of the earth itself. Imagine the agony of it, the Earth Mother forced to carry her tormented offspring in her own flesh. But Gaia wasn't just a victim, she was a strategist. Crafting a sickle of adamant, she gave it to her youngest Titan, Cronus, whispering the plan that would change everything. When Uranus descended to embrace her again, Cronus struck, severing his father's power in an act so violent it birthed new gods from the spilled blood, the Furies, avengers of wrongs, and the giants, creatures of fury and flame. This moment reveals Gaia's duality. She was both creator and destroyer, nurturing and ruthless. She could birth a universe, then tear it apart to protect what she loved. Even after the Titans fell, she remained guiding heroes, cursing kings, her voice woven into the fabric of every myth. When Zeus battled Typhon, the monstrous son she bore in her rage against the Olympians, it was Gaia who fueled the storm. Yet she also sheltered Demeter's daughter Persephone, offering caves and flowers as refuge. That's the power of Gaia. She isn't just the past, she's the constant. Every harvest, every earthquake, every time a seed splits open in the dark soil, that's her legacy. The Greeks didn't just worship her as a distant deity, they felt her in the trembling of the ground, the scent of rain on dry earth. She was the first mother, and like all mothers, she could be fierce. Her love built the world, but her wrath could unmake it. Tartarus wasn't just a place, it was a living nightmare given form. While Gaia rose as the solid earth and Uranus stretched across the heavens, Tartarus lurked beneath them all, a gaping maw of endless darkness. Hesiod paints it in terrifying scale, as far below the earth is below the sky. Try to fathom that distance. If you dropped a bronze anvil from Olympus, it would fall for 9 days and nights before barely scraping Tartarus' gates. This wasn't just underground, this was the anti-sky, a void so deep it defied mortal comprehension. But Tartarus was more than geography. Like Gaia and Uranus, it was a primordial deity, a conscious force of dread and retribution. While Hades' realm later became the land of the dead, Tartarus existed for a far darker purpose, eternal punishment. The Titans learned this firsthand. After their war with the Olympians, Zeus hurled them into Tartarus' depths, imprisoning them behind bronze gates guarded by the 100-handed hecatoncheires. Here, the once mighty Titans writhed in chains, their roars echoing through the abyss, a warning to any who dared challenge the new order. Yet Tartarus' horrors didn't end there. When Typhon, Gaia's monstrous son, rose to destroy Olympus, Zeus didn't just defeat him, he buried him alive in Tartarus, where the creature's fiery breath still fuels volcanic eruptions. Later myths tell of mortal sinners like Sisyphus and Tantalus suffering there, their torments tailored to their crimes. But what makes Tartarus truly chilling is its duality. It wasn't just a prison, it was a primordial force older than the gods themselves. In Orphic traditions, Tartarus even cradled the cosmic egg that birthed creation, suggesting that from its darkness came light, from its chaos order. This paradox reveals the Greeks' deep-seated fear of the abyss. Tartarus wasn't just a mythic location, It was the embodiment of their terror, of what happens when order crumbles, when the primal forces beneath civilization reclaim their due. Every earthquake, every chasm that split the earth was a reminder. Below the world of gods and men, Tartarus waited, hungry and eternal. Eros wasn't about whispered sweet nothings or playful arrows, not yet. Before he became the mischievous Cupid of later myths, Eros stood among the primordials as something far more profound, the irresistible force that pulled the cosmos together. Imagine the universe in its infancy, a swirling mass of unshaped elements. Without Eros, none of it would have cohered. He was the cosmic glue, the spark that compelled Gaia to embrace Uranus, that drew chaos into order. Hesiod describes him as one of the first beings to emerge from the void, a necessity as vital as earth or sky. Without attraction, without that primal urge to unite, creation would have remained fractured, stagnant. But here's where the myths diverge. Later poets softened Eros into a charming, winged youth, a symbol of fleeting desire. The Romans turned him into Cupid, a playful trickster whose arrows inspired petty romances. Yet the original Eros had nothing to do with hearts or flirtation. He was physics before physics existed, the reason particles bonded, why stars ignited, how life clung to life. Philosophers like Parmenides grasped this, depicting Eros as the architect of all structure, from the orbits of planets to the pulse of blood in living things. The Orphic tradition took it further, fusing Eros with Phanes, a radiant deity born from the cosmic egg. Phanes was light and life intertwined, a shimmering being whose very presence set creation into motion. In these rituals, Eros wasn't just a force, he was the first force, the divine thought that whispered, "Let there be." This version of Eros carried echoes of later philosophical concepts, Plato's ladder of love, where attraction begins with the physical but ascends to the divine. What makes Eros so fascinating is how he bridges the abstract and the intimate. The same power that spun galaxies into existence also draws two hands together. The Greeks understood that love, in its purest form, wasn't just emotion, it was the fabric of connection, the invisible thread stitching reality itself. So the next time you feel a pull toward someone or something, remember, you're not just experiencing a feeling, you're touching a remnant of the primordial, the same force that once willed the universe into being. Out of the primal void stepped two figures so fundamental they shaped the very rhythm of existence: Erebus, the suffocating darkness that lurked between stars, and Nyx, the night itself, vast and velvet and alive. While later gods ruled under the sun, these two were the unseen architects of the world's hidden hours. Erebus wasn't merely the absence of light. He was a presence, a creeping heaviness that pooled in caves and clung to the underside of the world. Nyx, his counterpart, was something grander, a celestial veil studded with constellations, her arrival each evening an inevitable tide. Together, they were the boundary between the known and the unknowable, the daily surrender to oblivion that even the gods couldn't escape. Their union birthed forces far more unsettling than simple shadows. Hypnos, the gentle touch of sleep, could fell armies with a whisper. Thanatos, his twin, carried the chill of finality in his wings, death not as violence but as an unanswerable silence. Then came the darker brood, Moros, the spectre of doom, the Kirs who feasted on battlefield carnage, even Nemesis, the relentless balance of retribution. Nyx didn't just birth abstractions, she unleashed the inevitabilities that gnawed at mortal hearts. Homer knew this when he wrote Zeus himself refusing to cross her in the Iliad, fearing the chaos she could unleash with a flick of her starless cloak. What made Nyx truly formidable was her autonomy. Unlike Gaia or Uranus, bound to their domains, Nyx moved untethered. She didn't answer to Olympus or Tartarus. Her nightly journey across the sky wasn't commanded, it was elemental, as unstoppable as time. Artists painted her chariot drawn by shadowy steeds, her arrival swallowing even the moon's glow. To stand beneath her was to feel the weight of the infinite, the humbling truth that every day, no matter how bright, must yield to her embrace. Yet Nyx wasn't cruelty incarnate. Her darkness was also a womb of dreams, of secrets, of lovers' whispers. The Greeks didn't fear the night, they respected its duality. Without Nyx, there'd be no stars to navigate by, no rest from labor, no space for the subconscious to unravel. Erebus, too, had his purpose. His shadows weren't just voids, but the fertile unknown where ideas sparked and mysteries festered. Together, they reminded the world that light couldn't exist without their domain, that even the gods needed the cover of night to scheme, to mourn, to be vulnerable. So the next time you watch dusk surrender to true dark, remember, you're witnessing more than a shift in light. You're seeing the oldest power dynamic in the cosmos, the primordial dance of Nyx and Erebus, still unfolding, still inescapable, as vast and intimate as your own heartbeat in the quiet hours before dawn. While Erebus and Nyx cloaked the world in darkness, their opposites emerged to carve out the realm of light. Aether and Hemera, the radiant siblings who made the heavens breathe. Aether wasn't just sky or air, he was the shimmering upper atmosphere, the pure, blinding luminescence that gods breathed while mortals choked on mere oxygen. Imagine standing on a mountaintop at dawn, watching the sun's first rays ignite the high clouds. That's Aether's domain, the untouchable brilliance where the Titans once walked. His sister Hemera, meanwhile, was day incarnate, a force so vital she didn't just bring light, she was light, her arrival scattering Nyx's shadows like a sigh dispersing smoke. Their dance was the first rhythm of the cosmos. Each evening, Nyx would stretch her starless veil across the sky, only for Hemera to peel it back at dawn, her fingers gilding the horizon. Aether would then flood the upper world, his glow separating the mortal realm from the divine. This wasn't just poetic imagery, it was the Greeks' way of explaining why the sky never truly darkened for the gods, why Olympus remained bathed in gold even as mortals huddled under torchlight. In some tales, Hemera even raced Nyx across the heavens, their chariots never colliding but forever chasing, an eternal game of celestial tag. But Hemera's role went deeper than illumination. When Pandora's cursed box spilled its horrors into the world, it was Hemera who lifted her veil each morning, forcing humanity to face what the night had hidden: war, famine, disease. Yet she also revealed hope's fragile glow, a reminder that darkness never lasts. Lesser-known hymns paint her as a compassionate figure, her light exposing truths too brutal for shadows. Farmers prayed to her for clarity, sailors followed her glow home. Even the Furies, those vengeful spawn of spilled blood, hesitated to hunt beneath her gaze. Aether, meanwhile, held mysteries of his own. Orphic texts suggest he was the secret fire Prometheus stole for mankind, not just flame, but the spark of divine intellect. Philosophers later conflated him with the very concept of pneuma, the breath of the universe. While Zeus ruled from cloudy heights, Aether was the unclaimed expanse beyond, the infinite canvas where constellations were born. Some myths even whisper that when Icarus soared too close to the sun, it wasn't Helios who melted his wings, it was Aether's unforgiving radiance, the boundary no mortal could cross. What makes these two so compelling is their quiet relentlessness. They demanded no temples, no sacrifices. Their power was in their constancy, the unspoken promise that light would always return, that the cosmos wasn't just chaos and punishment. In a world of capricious gods, Aether and Hemera were the steady pulse, the proof that even primordial forces could be gentle. So the next time you squint at a sunrise, remember, you're witnessing the oldest truce in existence, the daily miracle of Hemera parting Nyx's hair, of Aether painting the void with fire. The Greeks knew without them there'd be no stories to tell, just an endless, unbroken night. Gaia, alone in the swirling chaos of creation, did something extraordinary. She brought forth Uranus not through union but from her own boundless being. This wasn't just birth, it was an act of pure will. The sky god emerged as her perfect counterpart, his body a vault of stars stretching endlessly above her earthly form. Picture it, Gaia's mountains brushing his celestial heels, his constellations mirrored in her lakes. They were equals, bound not by love or choice, but by necessity, the first cosmic pair. Yet Uranus, for all his majesty, carried a tyrant's heart. Where Gaia nurtured, he ruled. Where she created, he controlled. He pressed down upon her with relentless weight, his sky body smothering her fertile depths. Their union wasn't tender, it was inescapable, a forced merging that birthed the Titans, the Cyclopes, the Hecatoncheires, beings of such raw power they terrified Uranus. So he did the unthinkable. Rather than cherish his offspring, he imprisoned them within Gaia's own flesh, condemning them to writhe in her cavernous womb. The earth itself became a prison. Can you imagine the agony? Gaia, the mother of all, forced to endure her children's screams echoing through her roots and rocks. Rivers ran black with her grief. Volcanoes erupted where her pain spilled over. But Gaia wasn't just suffering, she was scheming. In the deepest crevices of her being, she forged a weapon, a sickle of adamant sharp enough to carve fate itself. She whispered to her youngest Titan, Cronus, still hidden in her shadows. "The time has come," she told him, her voice the rumble of tectonic plates shifting. When Uranus next descended to envelop her, Cronus struck, not to kill but to sever. The act was as brutal as it was symbolic, the sky castrated by the earth, his power bleeding into the sea. From those drops rose the Erinyes, their wrath eternal, and Aphrodite, born from sea foam and spilled divinity. This moment wasn't just revenge, it was revolution. Uranus' fall set the stage for every divine war to come, a cycle of overthrow that would consume Cronus, then Zeus, echoing through the ages. But deeper still, it revealed the paradox of creation, how even the gods were bound by the same forces they wielded. Uranus sought control, but in crushing his children, he planted the seeds of his ruin. Gaia's love for her offspring turned her into an architect of rebellion. And Cronus, the usurper, would soon learn that no throne, no matter how lofty, escapes the lessons of the past. The Greeks understood this truth in their bones. Power, unchecked, becomes its own undoing. Uranus' reign began with the stars and ended in blood, a warning etched into the sky itself. Every time storm clouds gathered, every time the heavens shook with thunder, it was his legacy, a reminder that even the primordial cannot escape the consequences of their cruelty. The Aurea emerged from Gaia's body not as children, but as extensions of her very bones, great, jagged deities who held the sky aloft with their spines. While the Titans and Olympians dominated myths, these mountain gods stood silent and immovable, their peaks piercing the clouds like ancient thrones. Each was a living, breathing landform, worshipped in the villages clinging to their slopes. Mount Olympus, home of the gods, wasn't just a location. It was Aurea incarnate, its sacred heights buzzing with divine energy long before Zeus claimed it. These deities blurred the line between geography and divinity. To the Greeks, a mountain wasn't just rock and soil, it was a conscious force. Thessaly's Mount Othrys cradled the Titans during their war. Mount Helicon pulsed with artistic energy, its springs inspiring poets. And Mount Ida, where Paris made his fateful judgment, wasn't a passive backdrop it watched, its roots humming with Gaia's whispers. Local cults honored them with offerings of herbs and smoke, appeasing the gods who controlled landslides, springs, and the thin air where eagles nested. Their power lay in their steadfastness. While storms raged and gods schemed, the Aurea remained, weathering eras like sentinels. They were the ultimate survivors, older than the Olympians, untouched by Titanomachy, their slopes scarred but unbroken. Hesiod names 10 in his Theogony, though countless others rose across Greece's fractured landscape. Unlike the tempestuous sea or capricious sky, mountains were reliable. Farmers planted terraces on their flanks, shepherds followed their trails, and dying cities like Mycenae huddled in their shadows for protection. What's striking is how the Aurea defied anthropomorphism. They weren't depicted as human-like figures, but as the mountains themselves slopes their shoulders, caves their mouths, avalanches their rare outbursts of temper. To carve a path through their domain required respect, even reverence. The Greeks knew this intimately. When Persephone vanished into the underworld, it was a mountain, Mount Etna, that split open to reveal the chasm where Hades took her. When mortals like Oedipus sought prophecy, they climbed Mount Parnassus, where the rocks themselves seemed to murmur secrets. Their legacy lingers in language. The word sacred derives from Latin sacer, but the Greeks felt it in the Aurea's soil, a holiness woven into the land. Modern hikers scaling these slopes might not pray to them anymore, but the awe remains. That catch in your breath at the summit, the way thunderstorms sound angrier up high, the Aurea's presence silent and eternal, reminding us that some forces predate gods and outlast empires. They're Gaia's backbone, the unyielding framework upon which all other myths were hung. Pontus rose from Gaia's restless depths not as a child but as an equal, a roiling expanse of salt and storm given divine form. Where Uranus claimed the sky, Pontus ruled the unseen world below the waves, his body the Mediterranean's shifting currents and midnight trenches. The Greeks knew better than to romanticize him. This wasn't the orderly, encircling stream of Oceanus, the Titan who personified the world-encircling river. Pontus was chaos in liquid form, his moods shaping sudden squalls and riptides that could swallow ships whole. Fishermen whispered his name before casting nets, offering scraps of silver to placate his temper. Yet Pontus was more than mindless fury. His union with Gaia, his own mother, spawned a dynasty of sea deities who reflected the ocean's duality. Nereus, their eldest, bore the title Old Man of the Sea, a shape-shifting prophet who spoke in riddles as slippery as eels. Unlike his father's unpredictability, Nereus embodied the sea's wisdom, its ancient memory. Then came Thaumas, whose name meant wonder, father to the Harpies and the rainbow goddess Iris, proof that even the deep could birth marvels. But Pontus' lineage darkened with Phorcys and Ceeta, lovers who spawned nightmare incarnate, the Gorgons with their petrifying gaze, the serpentine Echidna, and the Draken Ladon, whose coils guarded the golden apples of the Hesperides. This brood reveals how the Greeks saw the sea, a realm of breathtaking beauty and unfathomable terror, often in the same tide. Pontus never appeared in art as a human-like god. He was the water itself, his presence felt in the brine-stung air, the sudden dead calm before a typhoon. Homer's Odysseus knew this intimately. When his crew angered Poseidon, it wasn't just the Olympians' wrath they faced, it was Pontus' primal fury unleashed, waves like mountains obliterating reason and hope. Yet Pontus also gifted humanity with its first navigators. The Nereids, his granddaughters, guided lost sailors home. Glaucus, a mortal transformed by his waters, became a patron of fishermen. Even the monsters he sired served a purpose. They set boundaries, warning mortals not to overreach. The Greeks understood that to sail Pontus' domain required humility, a lesson modern minds often forget. Today's oceanographers mapping abyssal zones or divers plumbing shipwrecks still encounter his essence. That dizzying moment when the familiar gives way to the eternal, when you realize the sea was here before nations, before gods, and will remain long after. Pontus' legacy isn't just in myths, it's in the Mediterranean's very DNA. Every time a storm surge claws at coastal villages or bioluminescence lights up the midnight waves, that's him reminding us that some forces defy domestication. The Olympians may have claimed dominion over his surface, but the depths, those will always belong to the primordial. The winds were never just weather to the Greeks, they were living forces with tempers and whims as unpredictable as the gods themselves. Long before the Olympians claimed dominion over the skies, the Anemoi, the primal wind gods, rushed forth from chaos-swirling depths. These weren't gentle breezes personified, they were the untamed breath of the cosmos, shaping destinies with every gust. Boreas, the north wind, wasn't merely cold air, he was a winged giant with frost in his beard, his howls freezing entire fleets. Zephyrus, the west wind, carried not just spring blossoms but the ferocity to snatch mortals into myth, as when he swept the nymph Orithyia from Athenian riversides to become his bride. Their origins tell the true story. While later poets placed them under Zeus' command, early hymns suggest the anemoi predated Olympus itself. Hesiod's Theogony links them to the starry Titan Astraeus and Eos, goddess of dawn, but their power felt older, raw, tied to the era when earth and sky first separated. Sailors knew this intimately. Unlike Poseidon, who could be appeased with sacrifices, the winds answered only to their own laws. Boreas especially resisted domestication. When the Persian navy threatened Athens, the city prayed to him, and he responded by shipwrecking hundreds of vessels with hurricane-force blasts. Each wind held distinct terrors and gifts. Notice the scorching south wind could wither crops or bring life-giving rains from Africa's dust-choked plains. Eurus, the seldom-mentioned east wind, carried the scent of distant spices and the storms that wrecked Odysseus near Circe's island. The Greeks didn't just fear them, they built towering altars like Athens' Tower of the Winds, where offerings of wine and honey were poured into bronze vents to whistle down to the deities below. What's fascinating is how these gods straddled myth and daily life. When Zephyrus' breath melted winter snows, farmers praised him as fervently as they feared Boreas' icy raids. The Spartans even timed their military campaigns by wind patterns, believing the gods favored those who moved with their currents. And in the tale of Boreas and Orithyia, we see the anemoi's duality: abductors, yes, but also bringers of change. Their daughter Chione became goddess of snow, binding earth and sky once more through her frozen touch. Unlike the Olympians, the wind gods couldn't be bribed or beguiled. They were the last remnants of the primordial world, untamed, ungovernable, reminding mortals that for all Zeus' thunderbolts, some forces still answered only to chaos. Even today, when a gale rattles your windows or a warm breeze carries the promise of spring, you're feeling the anemoi's legacy, proof that the oldest gods never truly fade. They just change direction. The fall of Uranus wasn't just the end of a god, it was the first domino in a chain of divine revolutions that would reshape the cosmos. When Cronus cast his father's severed power into the sea, he didn't just claim the throne, he inherited a cycle of violence that would consume his own reign. Gaia's hand in this coup was no accident. Her adamant sickle didn't merely wound Uranus, it carved the template for every succession myth to come, proving that even the primordial forces weren't immune to rebellion. What's chilling is how methodically Gaia orchestrated this shift. She didn't act in a fit of rage, but with the patience of tectonic plates grinding toward an earthquake. By choosing Cronus, her youngest, hungriest titan, she weaponized ambition itself. The act was poetic. Uranus, who feared his children's potential, was undone by the very trait he sought to suppress. Yet Gaia's revenge came at a cost. The blood that birthed Aphrodite also seeped into the foundations of the world, staining future generations with its curse. Cronus' rise marked a seismic shift in cosmic order. Where Uranus embodied unfettered tyranny, the Titans brought structure, however brittle. Cronus and his siblings Oceanus and Hyperion divided the realms among themselves, imposing the first semblance of governance. But the scars of betrayal ran deep. Paranoid after his own coup, Cronus devoured each child bore, swallowing whole the next generation just as Uranus had imprisoned his. The pattern was set, power maintained through fear, revolutions birthed from trauma. Gaia watched it all unfold, the architect of destruction now helpless against the machinery she'd set in motion. When smuggled Zeus to safety, replacing him with a swaddled stone for Cronus to consume, she wasn't just saving her son, she was fulfilling the prophecy Gaia herself had whispered to Uranus centuries before, that no ruler, no matter how vigilant, escapes the reckoning they sow. The Titanomachy wasn't just a war, it was the inevitable conclusion of primordial wounds left to fester. Even in victory, the Olympians couldn't escape this legacy. Zeus' first act after overthrowing Cronus, swallowing his own wife Metis whole to prevent a prophesied successor. The apple never falls far from the divine tree. What began as Gaia's scream of protest became the defining rhythm of Greek mythology, that every generation inherits both the throne and the traumas of those who came before, that power is always pregnant with its own undoing. The Titans didn't just bridge the primordial and Olympian ages, they proved that in the divine family tree, the roots are forever stained with blood. Chaos never truly disappeared from Greek mythology, it merely changed forms, erupting into the ordered world whenever the cosmos threatened to unravel. Nowhere is this clearer than in Zeus' cataclysmic battle with Typhus, a creature so monstrous he embodied chaos reborn. Born from Gaia's fury after the Titans' defeat, Typhus wasn't just another challenger to Olympus. His very anatomy defied creation, 100 serpent heads dripping venom, voices that mimicked gods and beasts and tempests all at once, wings that blotted out the sun. When he reared up from the earth, even the Olympians fled, transforming into animals to hide from his wrath, a humiliating retreat that revealed how fragile divine order could be. This climactic struggle mirrors older Near Eastern chaos myths in startling ways. The Babylonian Enuma Elish tells of Tiamat, the primordial saltwater goddess who births monsters to avenge her usurped consort, just as Gaia unleashed Typhus. Both tales feature younger sky gods, Marduk for Babylon, Zeus for Greece battling chaos incarnate to preserve cosmic hierarchy. The parallels run deeper. Marduk uses winds to inflate Tiamat's body before slicing her in half, creating heaven and earth from her carcass. Zeus, meanwhile, hurls lightning bolts to incinerate Typhus' serpent limbs before burying him under Mount Etna, where his fiery breath still fuels eruptions. These aren't coincidences but echoes of a shared ancient fear, that beneath civilization's veneer the void always stirs. Even in victory, the chaos never fully dies. Typhus' offspring, the Chimera, the Hydra, Cerberus became recurring threats, forcing heroes like Heracles to confront fragments of that primordial terror. The Greeks understood that chaos couldn't be destroyed, only contained. When Hephaestus' forge quakes or Dionysus' Maenads tear mortals limb from limb, it's chaos whispering through the cracks in Olympus' polished facade. This duality appears globally. Egyptian myths depict Ra battling the chaos serpent Apep each night. Norse legends tell of the world-ending wolf Fenrir, born from Loki's trickery. These stories aren't just about destruction, they're about balance. Without chaos, there's no impetus for creation, no testing of limits. The Greeks grasped this intimately. Their temples honored Apollo's reason and Dionysus' ecstasy in equal measure, recognizing that chaos wasn't the enemy of order but its shadow, its necessary counterpart. Every lightning bolt Zeus threw against Typhus didn't just suppress chaos, it defined what order meant. So next time you read about a hero facing some world-shaking monster, look closer. You're witnessing the oldest story ever told, the fragile line we draw between cosmos and chaos, and the eternal truth that neither can exist without the other. The myths knew it, the gods fought it, and somewhere beneath Etna's smoldering peak, Typhus still breathes fire into the night. Gaia's voice didn't fade with the Titan's fall, it coiled through the ages, a whisper in sacred groves and the shudder of earthquakes. Her prophecies were never mere predictions, they were weapons forged in the bedrock of time. When Zeus, flush with victory after the Titanomachy, sought to marry the sea nymph Thetis, it was Gaia who intervened with a truth so explosive it reshaped Olympus itself. She warned the sky god that any son born of Thetis would surpass his father, a nightmare for the king who'd overthrown his own kin. Zeus didn't just heed her, he orchestrated Thetis' marriage to a mortal, Peleus, ensuring their child would be a hero Achilles rather than a divine usurper. With one well-placed revelation, Gaia proved that even the Olympians danced to her ancient tune. Her wrath, though, was where her primordial power truly erupted. Enraged by the Titans' imprisonment in Tartarus, Gaia didn't merely mourn, she weaponized motherhood itself. Coupling with Tartarus, she birthed the giants, colossal warriors armored in serpents and flame, their very existence a challenge to Zeus' order. This wasn't just revenge, it was cosmic irony. The Olympians had defeated the Titans by allying with Gaia's earlier creations, the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires. Now she turned her creative fury against them, crafting beings strong enough to storm Olympus. The resulting Titanomachy wasn't just a battle, it was a primal scream against the new regime, a demand that the Earth's voice still mattered. Yet Gaia's influence wasn't limited to war or warnings. At Delphi, before Apollo claimed it as his oracle, the prophetic vapors rising from the earth were hers. Priests interpreted the hisses of her sacred pythons, their coils mirroring the serpentine energy beneath the soil. Even after Apollo slew the python and usurped her shrine, the Pythia still sat upon the omphalos, the navel of the world, a stone Gaia had placed to mark the Earth's center. The Olympians might rule the surface, but the cracks between their power always led back to her. What's chilling is how Gaia's strategies evolved. Unlike the Titans who fought head-on, she worked through proxies and paradoxes. When her giant offspring fell, she didn't retreat, she adapted. Some legends say she birthed Typhon as a last, desperate strike, but others suggest a darker truth, that she allowed Zeus to triumph because chaos to her was cyclical. The earth endures all rulers, volcanoes bury kingdoms, floods erase borders, and forests swallow temples. The Olympians, for all their thunder, were just another season to her. That's the heart of Gaia's legacy. She wasn't just a relic of the primordial age, she was the stage upon which every myth played out. When Persephone descended into the underworld, it was Gaia who opened the chasm. When Heracles wrestled Antaeus, it was Gaia's touch that renewed the giant's strength. Even in victory, the gods couldn't escape her. Their temples stood upon her back, their altars fed by her soil. The Greeks knew this intimately. They poured libations into the earth, not just to appease her, but to acknowledge the undeniable truth that all power, even divine, is borrowed. The earth gives and the earth takes away. Gaia never ruled, she simply endured. Tartarus didn't just hold prisoners, it reshaped them. The Titans, once rulers of the cosmos, became twisted reflections of their former glory within its abyss. Cronus, who devoured his own children to maintain power, now writhed in chains, his stomach eternally empty. His brothers Iapetus and Hyperion, who'd commanded light and wisdom, were reduced to groaning specters in the gloom. But what's chilling is how Tartarus didn't merely restrain them, it amplified their flaws. Oceanus, the great river titan, found himself parched in a desert of darkness, his endless waters now just a taunting memory. This wasn't just punishment, it was cosmic irony written in torment. And then there were the Cyclopes, the same one-eyed giants who'd forged Zeus' thunderbolts now swung their hammers in vain, their anvils silent, their forges cold. Tartarus had a way of perverting purpose. These master craftsmen who'd armed the gods for victory became prisoners of the very weapons they'd created. Yet Tartarus also held darker residents, mortals whose crimes shook the foundations of divine order. Sisyphus, the trickster king, endlessly pushed his boulder uphill only for it to roll back down, not because the slope was steep, but because Tartarus itself seemed to lean against him. Tantalus stood in a pool that receded when he stooped to drink, beneath fruit-laden branches that lifted beyond reach whenever he grasped for them. Their punishments weren't random, they were mirrors. Sisyphus, who'd cheated death twice, now faced a task as futile as his deceptions. Tantalus, who'd slaughtered his own son to test the gods, now suffered an eternal hunger no feast could satisfy. Guarding these damned souls were the Hecatoncheires Cottus, Briareos, and Gyges 100-handed giants who'd once been Zeus' allies. Now their 300 arms gripped the bronze gates of Tartarus, their 50 heads scanning the darkness for escapees. Virgil's Aeneid paints the scene with horrifying clarity. the pit's jagged walls oozing black vapor, the distant shrieks of the damned blending into a single droning wail. When Aeneas descends, he doesn't just see suffering, he hears it: the clang of chains, the hiss of serpents coiling around limbs, the whispered pleas that go unanswered. This was no passive dungeon. Tartarus actively hunted its inmates. Phlegethon, the river of fire, didn't just burn. It pursued sinners like liquid vengeance, its flames adapting to each victim's worst fears. What makes Tartarus truly terrifying isn't its cruelty, but its intelligence. Every torment was tailor-made, every scream part of a grand design. The Titan's imprisonment wasn't just about removing threats, it was a warning etched in divine flesh. Challenge the cosmos order, and the cosmos would break you. Even the Hecatoncheires, fearsome as they were, weren't immune. Their watch was eternal, their loyalty purchased not by reward, but by the knowledge that Tartarus had room for everyone, even its guards. Eros began as anything but a rosy-cheeked cherub. His earliest form was a cosmic force so fundamental that without him, atoms wouldn't bond and planets wouldn't orbit. This primordial Eros, described in Hesiod's Theogony, emerged alongside Chaos and Gaia, a deity of raw, unthinking attraction that held the universe together. Compare that to the later Eros, Aphrodite's playful son, who flitted through myths with his bow and arrows, pricking gods and mortals alike with fleeting desire. The difference isn't just evolution, it's a complete reimagining. One Eros built galaxies while the other orchestrated bedroom farces. Plato's Symposium bridges these two versions brilliantly. In Aristophanes' speech, love is a desperate search for wholeness, souls chasing their missing halves. But when the philosopher Diotima takes the stage, Eros transforms again. Not a god but a daemon, a force that pulls humanity from base lust toward divine beauty. Here, Eros becomes a ladder, each rung representing a higher form of love, from physical attraction to the love of wisdom itself. This duality, earthly and celestial, mirrors the primordial Eros who shaped atoms and the later Cupid who toyed with hearts. The Orphic mysteries took it further. They called him Phanes, a radiant, androgynous deity hatched from the cosmic egg, his body adorned with stars and animal heads. Phanes wasn't just a god, he was creation's first thought, the spark that set chaos into motion. Orphic hymns describe him holding a scepter, not a bow, commanding the universe with light, not arrows. In one stunning fragment, he's called Arikpeos, meaning power of movement, the very reason rivers flow and stars burn. Yet even this sublime version couldn't escape irony. The same Eros who birthed order also sowed the seeds of chaos. His power to unite also divided. Uranus and Gaia's catastrophic embrace, Zeus's countless affairs, even Paris and Helen's doomed passion, all traced back to that primal force. The Greeks understood that love, at its core, was both architect and wrecking ball. Whether as Phanes weaving the cosmos or Aphrodite's son unraveling marriages, Eros never chose sides. He was the binding energy and the splitting atom, proving that creation and destruction share the same heartbeat. So next time you see a Cupid statue, look past the chubby cheeks. That's not just a Valentine's mascot, it's the echo of a god who once willed worlds into being, whose true arrows aren't gold but gravitational pull, whose real targets aren't hearts but the fabric of existence. The myth hasn't been watered down, it's been layered like sediment over bedrock, waiting for you to dig deeper. Nyx didn't just bring night, she birthed the very concepts that haunt the edges of human existence. Her children weren't gods with domains to rule, but forces so intrinsic they shaped fate itself. Moros, her firstborn, was doom incarnate, not just death, but the inescapable moment when destiny tightens its noose. When Oedipus fled Corinth to avoid his prophecy, it was Moros who guided his steps toward the crossroads where he'd unknowingly slay his father. Then came the Kirs, spectral reapers who feasted on battlefield carnage, their talons dripping with the lifeblood of fallen warriors. Homer's Iliad paints them as whirlwinds of gore, hovering over doomed soldiers like vultures scenting decay. but Nyx's brood grew darker. There was Thanatos, her twin-faced son, gentler than the Kyrs but no less final. Where they reveled in violence, he arrived with solemn inevitability, his touch like frost on a fevered brow. Yet even he paled beside Nyx's daughters, the Fates, Clotho spinning the thread of life, Lachesis measuring its length, and Atropos, she of the unturnable scissors, who snipped it without remorse. These three weren't just observers, they wove the fabric of reality itself, their looms click-clack echoing in every mortal heartbeat. Nyx's most terrifying act, though, was what she created alone. In Hesiod's Theogony, she births Nemesis without a mate retribution given form, the force that topples tyrants and humbles the proud. When Narcissus spurned love to admire his own reflection, it was Nemesis who twisted his vanity into a curse. Even the Olympians feared her. Zeus himself used her as his enforcer, unleashing her upon mortals who dared reach too high, like Bellerophon aspiring to ride Pegasus to Olympus. The night goddess rarely stepped from the shadows, but when she did, the cosmos held its breath. In a lost Orphic hymn, she warns Zeus against attacking her, her cloak swallowing the light of his thunderbolts until he staggers back blinded. Virgil's Aeneid glimpses her circling Tartarus, her wings brushing the damned as they flinch from her chill. What makes Nyx unique among primordials is her restraint. She doesn't wage wars or demand worship. Her power is in her whispers, in the way she lets her children do the work while she watches, eternal and unmoved. That's the genius of Nyx. While other deities fought for prominence, she understood that darkness needs no promotion, it's already everywhere waiting. Every time you hesitate at a threshold after sunset, every time a shiver runs down your spine for no reason, that's her legacy. Not just night, but all the uncanny things it births when no one's looking. Aether's influence didn't fade with the rise of the Olympians. It seeped into the very foundations of human thought, shaping how ancient philosophers and later scientists understood the cosmos. To the pre-Socratic thinkers, Aether wasn't just a mythic remnant. He was the answer to a fundamental question: what fills the space between stars, the realm beyond our reach? Aristotle codified this idea in his theory of the fifth element, the quintessence. While earth, water, air, and fire govern the terrestrial sphere, ether, pure, unchanging, and divine, was the substance of the heavens. This wasn't poetic metaphor, it was early cosmology. Aristotle's ether moved in perfect circles, distinct from the messy, linear motion of earthly elements, a concept that persisted for centuries as astronomers mapped planetary orbits. The parallels between myth and science grew even stranger in the Renaissance. When Newton grappled with light's behavior, he proposed the luminiferous ether, an invisible medium through which light waves traveled like ripples in a celestial pond. Though later disproven by Michelson and Morley's experiments, this ether wasn't just a scientific placeholder. It was the ghost of the primordial god, repurposed to explain the unexplainable. Even Einstein, whose relativity theory shattered the ether concept, acknowledged its lingering allure, calling it the last echo of the old mechanical worldview. What's fascinating is how these theories mirror ether's mythic role. Just as the Greeks saw him as the air gods breathed finer and brighter than mortal air, scientists imagined ether as a subtler form of matter, undetectable yet essential. The 19th century physicist James Clerk Maxwell even described it as the great ocean of electricity, a phrase that wouldn't feel out of place in an Orphic hymn. This interplay between myth and science reveals something profound. Humans have always sought to name the invisible forces stitching reality together. Whether called ether or dark energy, the impulse remains the same, to grasp the substance of the stars. And while modern physics has abandoned the idea, traces linger in quantum field theories, vacuum energy, an echo of that ancient belief that emptiness is never truly empty. The Greeks may have worshipped ether as a god, but in our quest to decode the universe, we're still chasing his shadow. The primordial gods may not have had the grand temples of Olympus, but their presence pulsed through the cracks of everyday worship in ways that would surprise modern audiences. Take Gaia at Delphi before Apollo claimed the oracle. The site belonged to her. Priestesses inhaled vapors rising from the earth itself, interpreting the hisses of sacred pythons coiled around Gaia's stone omphalos. Even after Apollo slew the serpent and took control, traces of her lingered. The Pythia still sat upon that ancient rock, the literal navel of the world, as if Gaia whispered through every prophecy. Farmers left offerings of first fruits in fissures where the ground exhaled strange mists, knowing the earth remembered its first goddess. Nyx's cult in Megara was even more haunting. Unlike the communal festivals for Zeus or Athena, her worship happened in near-total secrecy. A single shrine stood beneath an overhanging cliff where sunlight never reached, its altar stained with the ash of burned poppies flowers that brought both sleep and visions. Those who sought Nyx came alone, whispering requests into the dark. The few surviving inscriptions call her the one who sees but is never seen, hinting at rituals where worshippers blindfolded themselves to meet her properly. Imagine standing in that cave-like temple, your fingers tracing the chill stone as you confessed fears no daylight god would understand. For most primordials, though, worship was too abstract for statues or temples. How do you build a shrine to chaos when it's the absence of form itself? Instead, these deities lived in hymns, those primal verses where singers didn't just praise the gods but invoked their raw power. The Orphic hymns to Nyx describe her as mother of gods and men, her voice the sigh between stars. When priests chanted these lines at dusk, they weren't just reciting poetry, they were weaving a thread back to creation's first moments. Even Tartarus had his verses, though they were rarely sung aloud. One fragment from a Spartan war hymn mentions the deep-throated one below, as if the earth might split open if his name was shouted too boldly. What's fascinating is how these cults inverted normal religious logic. While Olympian worship demanded perfect temples and unblemished sacrifices, the primordial rites embraced imperfection. Gaia's shrines were often simple standing stones weathered by time. Offerings to Pontus were tossed into the sea without fanfare, vanishing into the waves like his ever-shifting nature. This wasn't negligence, it was theological genius. How better to honor forces older than form than through rituals that mirrored their essence? A crumbling altar to chaos makes more sense than a polished one. Nyx's invisibility was the point of her worship. The scattered evidence we have a Megarian prayer tablet here, a Delphic fissure there paints a picture of worship that was intimate, almost furtive. These weren't gods you praised in sunlight with crowds. They were the ones you sought when the harvest failed or grief clawed too deep, when only the oldest forces would do. Modern archaeologists still debate whether certain cave markings are maps or invocations to Erebus. That ambiguity feels fitting. The primordials thrived in the unanswerable, the places where myth and trembling human hope bled together. Their temples weren't built with marble, but with the moments when a lone voice in the dark called out and the darkness answered. The Titanomachy wasn't just a war between gods, it was chaos itself roaring back against the fragile order taking shape. For 10 brutal years, the cosmos trembled as Titans and Olympians clashed, but beneath the thunder of Zeus' lightning and the tremors of falling mountains, this was really Gaia's oldest conflict playing out anew. She who had birthed Uranus only to turn against him now watched as her grandchildren tore apart the world she'd built. Her alliances shifted like tectonic plates, first whispering strategy to Zeus, arming him with Cyclops-forged weapons, then recoiling when he cast her Titan children into Tartarus with the same cruelty Uranus had shown. The earth itself cracked under her rage, geysers of molten rock erupting where her fingers clawed at the surface. This pattern didn't end with the Titan's defeat. When Gaia birthed the gigant serpent-legged monstrosities with eyes like smoldering coals, she wasn't just seeking revenge. She was reasserting the primordial truth that order is temporary, that chaos always resurges. The Titanomachy became the ultimate metaphor for this struggle. The giants didn't just hurl boulders at Olympus, they ripped islands from their roots to use as projectiles, their very existence defying the laws Zeus had imposed. One giant, Alcyoneus, couldn't even be killed on Greek soil. He regenerated each time he touched Gaia, his mother's boundless energy coursing through him. It took Heracles dragging him beyond her borders to deliver the fatal blow. Yet Gaia's most terrifying gambit was Typhon, a storm-given flesh. With 100 dragon heads that dripped venom and coils powerful enough to strangle continents, he wasn't just another challenger, he was chaos incarnate. When Typhon tore Zeus' sinews from his body, leaving the king of gods a broken husk in a cave, it wasn't mere violence. It was the universe reminding Olympus that its reign rested on borrowed time. Even after Zeus recovered and buried Typhon under Mount Etna, the message lingered. Every time the mountain spewed fire, every time earthquakes shattered cities, Gaia was whispering, "You rule only because I allow it." What makes these conflicts so gripping is how they invert expectations. The Olympians paint themselves as bringers of order, but their victories rely on tactics just as brutal as their predecessors. Zeus doesn't outsmart Typhon, he overwhelms him with sheer force, the same way Uranus tried to crush the Titans. The so-called Age of Order begins with a cycle of violence identical to the chaos it claims to replace. Even Gaia's betrayals mirror this. She turns on Uranus to free her children, then turns on Zeus for the same reason, becoming both architect and destroyer of every cosmic regime. This tension between chaos and order wasn't just mythic drama, it was the Greeks explaining natural disasters, political upheavals, the sense that civilization hangs by a thread. When volcanoes erupt or empires fall, that's not random tragedy. It's Gaia stirring in her sleep, Typhon testing his chains, the primordial refusing to be forgotten. The Olympians may have won the battles, but the war never truly ends. You can hear it in the distant rumble of thunder, feel it when the ground shifts underfoot the old powers, restless, eternal, waiting for their turn to rise again. Primordial deities rarely appeared in classical art, their abstract nature defied easy portrayal. But on the Pergamon altar's Titanomachy frieze, a weathered fragment reveals Nyx's chilling cameo. Carved in swirling marble, her shadowy form engulfs a Titan mid-battle, her wings stretching wider than the combatants themselves. Unlike the Olympians with their idealized features, Nyx is pure atmosphere, no face, no limbs, just an ominous presence swallowing the scene. This wasn't mere artistic choice, it was theological precision. How do you depict the night as anything but an all-consuming void? Renaissance artists faced the opposite challenge: how to render chaos, that shapeless abyss, into something human eyes could grasp. A 16th century engraving by Antonio Tempesta takes Hesiod's Theogony literally. Chaos becomes a bearded elder vomiting stars and demons, his body dissolving into storm clouds. It's creative but misleading. Hesiod never described chaos with limbs or a face. More haunting is Giorgio Gissy's 1589 etching, where chaos is a swirling vortex of limbs and animal heads, a visual echo of Orphic cosmic eggs. These weren't just illustrations, they were attempts to cage the uncageable in ink and parchment. The Baroque period took a subtler approach. In Rubens' The Birth of the Milky Way, Gaia's presence is implied in the earthly tones grounding the celestial spectacle, her body the canvas itself. Meanwhile, William Blake's watercolors reimagined primordial forces as psychic landscapes. His Ancient of Days shows a Urizen-like figure measuring chaos with a compass, a nod to the Orphic fanes bringing order from the abyss. What makes these depictions so fascinating is their desperation to visualize the invisible. The ancients grasped that primordials weren't beings but forces best honored through absence, like Nyx's empty alcove in Eleusis or Delphi's Omphalos stone, worn smooth by countless hands seeking Gaia's pulse. Perhaps the truest portrait of chaos isn't in art at all, but in the blank space between brushstrokes, the silence between musical notes. the gaps where the primordial still breathes. The Orphic tradition didn't just tweak Hesiod's creation myth, it turned it inside out. Where theogony begins with chaos as the yawning void, the Orphic hymns whisper of something older, Chronos, time itself, a serpentine deity coiled around the cosmic egg. This wasn't just a different starting point, it was a philosophical revolution. In Orphism, the universe didn't emerge from formless chaos but from a divine egg, cracked open by Chronos to release Phanes, the radiant androgynous god whose body was a tapestry of stars and beasts. Phanes wasn't just another primordial, he was creation's first thought, the spark that set the void alight with order. His very name meant to bring light, and his golden wings spanned the abyss, stitching together the fabric of reality. The contrast with Hesiod couldn't be starker. Hesiod's chaos is passive, a blank canvas waiting for Gaia and Uranus to impose structure. But the Orphic egg is dynamic, its shell shattering not from conflict but from inevitability, as if time itself demanded the universe awake. Phane's birth mirrors this duality. His emergence isn't violent but luminous, a burst of light carving meaning from darkness. Where Hesiod's gods rise through struggle, Orphism's creation feels almost ecstatic, a dance of elements converging by design. This vision of cosmic harmony didn't just stay in ritual texts. Centuries later, Neoplatonists like Proclus seized on the Orphic egg as a metaphor for the One, the ultimate source of all existence. To them, Phanes wasn't merely a deity but the divine intellect, the nous, that mediated between the infinite and the material world. His androgyny symbolized the unity of opposites, a concept Plotinus would later expand into his theory of emanations, that all things flow from a single, ineffable source. Even the egg itself became allegory, representing the bounded cosmos unfolding from boundless potential, much like Plato's demiurge shaping chaos into order. What makes Orphic cosmogony so enduring is its refusal of randomness. In Hesiod, the universe stumbles into being through conflict and chance, but in the Orphic hymns, creation is a deliberate act, a symphony where every note has purpose. Modern physicists might smirk at the egg metaphor, yet they've replaced it with their own singularity, a point of infinite density that birthed the Big Bang. The details change, but the instinct remains, to trace the universe back to something whole, something intentional. Whether you call it Phanes or quantum fluctuation, the human mind still reaches for that first light, the moment the void took a breath and became alive. The primordial gods never truly left us, they just shape-shifted, slipping into modern stories and scientific jargon with eerie persistence. Take Gaia's latest incarnation in Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series, where she's not just the Earth but a vengeful force awakening to purge humanity. Riordan didn't invent this twist, he tapped into her oldest mythic role, the mother who nurtures and destroys in equal measure. Marvel Comics' Eternals did something similar, reimagining the primordials as celestials, cosmic giants whose blood seeded planets with life. These aren't casual references, they're proof that these ancient forces still resonate, they're archetypes buried deep in our collective storytelling DNA. Chaos theory, ironically, owes its name to the very deity the Greeks feared could unmake reality. When scientists describe a butterfly's wings triggering hurricanes or fractal patterns repeating infinitely in nature, they're echoing Hesiod's vision of chaos, a void where small disruptions spiral into cataclysm. The mathematician Benoit Mandelbrot's work on chaos geometry even mirrors the Orphic cosmic egg, with self-replicating patterns birthing complexity from simplicity. Science didn't replace myth, it gave chaos a new vocabulary, trading sickle-wielding titans for nonlinear equations. Carl Jung would argue this isn't coincidence. His concept of the collective unconscious, the shared psychic bedrock of humanity, is littered with primordial archetypes. Nyx isn't just a goddess, she's the shadowy unknown we confront in dreams and dread. Tartarus lives in our nightmares of falling, that visceral terror of the abyss. Even Eros transcends Valentine's cards, manifesting as the universal drive for connection, not just between lovers, but between atoms, ideas, stars. Jungian therapists might say we're still wrestling with these forces, whether we name them gods or psychological constructs. Video games have become the latest temple for these old gods. Hades, the critically acclaimed roguelike, paints Nyx as a regal figure draped in constellations, her voice the hum of the void between stars. Players don't just encounter her, they feel her presence in every randomized dungeon run, a nod to chaos unpredictability. Meanwhile, God of War, Ragnarok reimagines Gaia as a crumbling titan, her body literal landscape proof that even in digital realms the earth remembers its divinity. The primordial gods endure because they answer questions science still grapples with. Why does nature oscillate between creation and destruction? Why do humans fear the dark yet crave its secrets? The Greeks didn't have quantum physics or depth psychology, but they understood these rhythms intuitively. Next time you hear a scientist describe dark matter as the unseen fabric of the universe, or a poet compare love to gravity, listen closer. That's not just metaphor, it's the echo of Fane's wings, the whisper of a story older than time. Even the ancient Greeks couldn't agree on what the primordial deities truly were, living gods to be feared or abstract forces personified. Hesiod's Theogony leaves this question hanging, describing chaos as both the gaping void and the progenitor of gods, Nyx as night incarnate yet capable of bearing divine children. This ambiguity wasn't oversight, it reflected a world where the line between natural phenomenon and conscious deity blurred like mist over the Aegean. Modern scholars still spar over these texts. Some, like classicist Walter Burkert, argue primordials were never worshipped. They were literary devices, poetic shorthand for cosmic forces beyond human comprehension. Others point to Nyx's shadowy shrines or Gaia's prophetic fissures at Delphi as proof these forces did receive reverence, if not the grand temples of Olympus. The philosophical tradition only deepened the divide. Plato's Timaeus reimagined chaos as Cora, a formless receptacle of existence, not a god but the raw material God shaped. Yet Neoplatonists like Plotinus saw the primordials differently, emanations of the one, divine minds manifesting as elemental powers. To them, Eros wasn't just attraction but the metaphysical glue binding the universe, closer to quantum entanglement than a winged child with arrows. Even Stoic physicists weighed in, conflating chaos with pneuma, the fiery breath animating all things, less a deity than the divine spark within atoms. This tension between literal and allegorical echoes in modern interpretations. Comparative mythologists like Joseph Campbell often frame primordials as archetypes, chaos representing the subconscious, Gaia the nurturing yet devouring mother. But archaeologists counter with physical evidence, the omphalos stones at Gaia's shrines, the poppy seed offerings to Nyx found in Attic graves. These weren't symbols, they were conduits to real power. Perhaps the answer lies in the way the ancients experienced their world. A farmer feeling the earthquake didn't wonder if Gaia was metaphor or goddess, he fled from her wrath. A sailor watching storm clouds swallow the horizon didn't debate Nyx's ontological status, he prayed. The primordial gods thrived in that liminal space between force and consciousness, where the wind wasn't just moving air but the breath of a god too vast to name. That's why they endure, not as tidy categories, but as reminders that some mysteries refuse to be solved. The primordial gods were never meant to be worshipped in grand temples, they were the temple itself. Chaos, Gaia, Nyx, Tartarus, these weren't just characters in a story. They were the foundation stones of reality, the raw materials from which every myth, every constellation, every breath of wind was carved. Think of them as the hidden architecture of the universe, the invisible forces that made the Greek cosmos possible. Chaos wasn't just emptiness, it was the blank page upon which the gods would write their stories. Gaia wasn't just the earth, she was the stage, the audience, and sometimes the director of the drama unfolding above her. Nyx didn't just bring night, she was the velvet curtain between acts, the pause that made the dawn matter. What's astonishing isn't just their power, but how deeply these forces still resonate. Chaos lives in our modern fascination with the void black holes, the Big Bang, the quantum foam. Gaia's spirit thrives in environmental movements, reminding us the Earth isn't just our home but a living force with its own will. Nyx, her legacy pulses through our fear of the dark, our midnight creativity, even the way we speak of dark times as something tangible. Tartarus became our metaphor for irreversible consequences, hell, rock bottom, the point of no return. These weren't just ancient concepts, they're baked into how we see the world. And yet, for all their power, the primordials were destined to fade into the background. The Titans would rise from Gaia's wounds, only to be toppled by their own children, the Olympians, those glittering gods of lightning and love who claimed the spotlight. But here's the twist, the Olympians never truly escaped their ancestors. Zeus' thunderbolts were forged by Gaia's cyclopes. Hades' kingdom was just Tartarus wearing a crown. Even Aphrodite, goddess of desire, traced her lineage back to the blood of Uranus, proof that Eros, that first cosmic glue, still held everything together. So now we're left with a question not just about mythology, but about ourselves. When you look at these primordial forces, which one speaks to you, the unshakable earth beneath your feet? The thrilling terror of the unknown, the night that hides your secrets. These gods don't demand worship, they're too busy being the fabric of existence. But they do invite curiosity, so tell us in the comments, if you could sit down with one primordial force, which would it be? The answer might reveal more than you expect. After all, we're all made of the same stardust and shadows they once shaped.